Hello, welcome back to the Breadwinners Shifting the Hustle series, where we talk about the transformations we've seen in the world of work in this post-pandemic era and how that impacts us and our well-being. I'm Rachael Lowell-Ellison. Every episode in this series has been looking at an aspect of how work has changed and what we need to pay attention to. It's all woven into what we're calling the shift model: security, horizon, impact, fluidity, and ties. In this episode, we're focusing on fluidity. Now, when we think about how the pandemic has changed our work culture and our lives, this is probably the category we think about first. It's about where we work and how we adapt. It's about the evolving landscape of remote and hybrid work models, organizational policies around flexibility. It's about our adaptability to change. How do we navigate the waves of change and transition that seem to not be stopping? And how do we think about our work lives and how they've been integrated in ways that we had never experienced before? Everything has shifted irreversibly, at least in my opinion. But we've got a lot of work to do to figure out what it's going to look like going forward. Many employees feel that they stepped up in face of the demands of the pandemic and remote work and would like to maintain the autonomy that they've proven that they can handle. On the other hand, there are leaders who are trying to pull it back and talk about return to office and make odd videos about it to the tune of I go on A, which was WebMD a couple weeks ago. They also are making proclamations about the character of those people who choose remote work. That was Elon Musk. So there's this huge disconnect. And the question is, how do we make work to allow for all of the things that we've learned and all the things we need to go forward? So the best person in the world to talk about this is our guest today. It's Cali Yost. She is an authority and a visionary on high performance work flexibility and has been for literally decades. She is a strategist, an author, a keynote speaker, and the founder and CEO of the Flex+Strategy Group, a solutions focused on helping organizations unlock performance and engagement by reimagining how, when, and where work is done. They recently published a report called The Now and Next of Work, and it goes into what's happening, what we need to do, how leaders and employees are disconnected in their perceptions of flexible work. And in this conversation, we talk about how do we bridge the gap between those perspectives and create work environments that are truly fluid. Cali, it's an honor to have you with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's talk about, like I said, I found your work when I was working on a project about work life in 2009. And you'd been in the space for a long time already. And at that point, the idea of having a flexible work environment was a little bit, it wasn't totally outside of the realm of possibility, but it wasn't what it is now. So there have been some pretty significant changes, wouldn't you say, over the past couple of decades in this space. When you think about the past few years, right, just what we've experienced with COVID, with return to office, what word or phrase would you use to describe the transformation we've experienced and why?
The word I would use would be unintentional, which is essentially whether it was unintentional before COVID and already the traditional work model was disappearing and there was already flexibility, but it was just not coordinated. It was not strategic. It was not consistently executed. And then COVID was just crazy crisis driven. We have to just do it. And people brought it, but it wasn't, again, particularly thoughtful or intentional. And now on the other side, as we begin to try to transition to what's going to be next, it continues to be, in most cases, very unintentional. And I think the next challenge is going to be organizations and leaders making peace with the fact that the intentionality is where we need to go next. So,
yeah, isn't that the case? One of the things that I thought was, is really a central quote that you have, a central kind of thesis of the research that you just published is there's a widening gap between how employees and leadership perceive flexible work success. I'm curious, as you think about the idea of intentional versus unintentional, do employees see more intentionality, feel more intentional about the way they're combining work and life than their leaders feel they're being? Tell us more about that.
I think they think they're being more effective than their leaders think they are being. Now, when you look at our new research, we found, interestingly, the same thing we found before COVID, the last time we did our research. So the last time we did the study was 2017, end of 2017. So pretty much right before COVID. And we waited on purpose, intentionally, to do it again until we were what we could gauge as being on the other side. So we waited until the health emergency was lifted in May. Okay. So we wanted to see kind of a pre and a post, right? And surprisingly, we found still that very fewer than half of employees got any kind of training or guidance. Okay.
Right.
So when they're being intentional, they're kind of having to do it on their own. Okay. So how effective that is, I don't know, but they think they're being much more effective in how, when, and where they are personally performing than leaders and organizations are seeing it. So the mismatch is on the other side of COVID, you have leaders and organizations that do see valid performance issues that are of concern to them. Right. Issues around development, issues around some efficiency in communication, just a cohesiveness in culture that worries them. But the problem is their default response is, oh, let's get back to the office. It will be resolved if we all just come back into the physical workspace.
Right.
But again, that assumes that the activities that will contribute to development, that will contribute to effective coordination and communication are prioritized and planned and happening when people are together. Right. And you've defined what's going to happen when you're not together, because coming back 5 days a week is a non-starter for jobs that can be done at least part-time remotely. I just think getting people who know, they can't unsee what they've now seen. Okay. They can't unsee it. So they now know they can perform. To say to be back full-time 5 days a week is not going to happen. So you have to make sure that you're being planful about making sure those priorities that will lead to the performance outcomes you're trying to achieve by being in person are going to happen. That is the part that is lacking in terms of leaders understanding that on the other side, you have all these people who think they're already doing everything that you say needs to be done by being in person. Right. And so that's what our research found is we found, for example, 60+% of people thought that they were communicating and coordinating just as effectively. 70+% said, you know what, we are just as productive and engaged as we were. So I think what we have to start to do is to say, how do we meet in the middle? And how do we begin to take the best of what we've learned and people learned they could do when they were not necessarily with each other every day, and add back in what is not happening, which is real and true, to create a new context of the way we'll all work that gets us aligned. So that's where we are.
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. First of all, how amazing is it to have this baseline data from 2017 and be able to look back? I mean, just again, so far ahead of the curve, Cali, always. But I think that really excites me. I get a little uneasy when I hear about some of the concerns leaders have about performance, about development. I understand them, right? We are moving at rapid speed into a new reality where we absolutely need folks to continue to develop. And, I think many employees are operating from a state where they're really just trying to kind of stay afloat, right? We've been
Correct.
through a couple years of chronic stress, and that doesn't breed creativity and innovation often. It breeds, let's try to just keep it, keep on keeping on. But when you mention leaders who are, feel like the culture, I'm going to forget the phrase that you just used, but kind of the cultural, there's something off, right, in the culture. That's where I think leaders hit kind of a panic button.
Mm-hmm.
Something feels off to them.
Right.
I think some of it has to do with what they're seeing in the organization and communication, which is absolutely valid. And I've seen that as I've worked with organizations. I do think there's a piece of it, and you've talked about this in your writing.
But that goes back to the lack of intentionality, right? So a lot of this
Right.
is executed in an unintentional way. So there are things that could be improved for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. No, and I think the other piece is there's also, we have folks who have built their careers as leaders in a workforce that looked a certain way, in a workplace that looked a certain way. And part of the intentionality is the willingness to shift your mindset, to be able to say, okay, at this point in my career, at this level, I got to think differently. I can't just kind of continue to lead the charge the way that I have. And that's really,
That's
I think
leadership.
that's leadership.
That's leadership, to be able to step back and say, we have been through a historic disruption of work
Yep.
for 3+ years. And it's not just people who were able to work remotely. If you think about it, even people who were on site, I mean, they had to do their jobs differently. They knew,
Right.
even just scheduling differently, just being together in a physical space differently. Like, there was a lot of innovative thinking around how we could get the work done, regardless of how we did our particular jobs. So I think for a leader to recognize that, while at the same, it's almost like holding that tension, right? Like holding two things at the same time, being able to say, I need to step away from my default belief on how this all happens. At the same time, be able to hold strong with that there are things that matter that I believe are missing. And not kind of hold that tension and then invite the workforce into the new solution. To bring them in to say, I hear you. I understand you feel personally productive. You feel personally more engaged working flexibly. You feel you personally are communicating and personally being innovative. I hear you. But now we got to look at the we here. Like, how are we together developing each other across these different dimensions? What does that look like? Because I think there will likely be things that are identified that benefit from being in the same place and space together.
100%.
But
Yeah.
you will also identify at the same time how you are going to develop when you are not together, because that can't stop at the four walls of your office. Okay, there's got to be that continuation when you are not in the same place and space. So those are all the conversations that have to happen. And you know what's really interesting, Rachael, which I find fascinating? So right now, everybody's focused on AI. Okay. It's almost like we've landed the plane on where and when. So now let's switch on over to AI. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is valid. Okay. 100% valid. There are task forces. There are, it's all hands on deck looking at AI. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, that's the how. But now let's add the where and the when into that all hands on deck. Let's get us all on the same page effort. And it baffles me. It's mind boggling to me that you would put that much effort into one aspect of work transformation and yet none of that into this other piece, because AI is, again, really important, but it is going to happen in the context of where and when people are working. And it will have to be thought through how it's being executed within a flexible work model. That is not happening.
Yeah.
So, that's the leadership, is pulling all those pieces together and inviting that transformational conversation.
That's something that you've said for so long. And I saw this when I was in my last role leading future of work efforts and giving a presentation about performance management and talking about some of the skills. And I had someone say what I know folks have said to you over and over again. I'm talking about really focusing not on face time, but talking about results and things that you've been talking about forever. And one woman on a finance team raised her hand and she said, "Sorry, isn't this what we're supposed to be doing as managers anyway?"
Yep.
And I think, you've been saying it forever.
Yeah.
When you talk about this, isn't this what leaders should be doing anyway? Showing this level of compassion, of forethought, being able to, as I hear you talking, you're really, we were talking before we jumped on about the idea of kind of focusing on skills. And as you're talking, you're just highlighting skills that really should have been baked in before, but weren't, like communication, just basic, like really clear, focused, expressive communication, both in terms of the kind of the logistics and the practical aspects and also the human aspects. So I want to use that as an opportunity to kind of switch us over to this theme that we're talking about this season of well-being, right? And I think that when we talk about well-being, and something that I want to be aware of and throughout my conversations on this season, is that I'm not talking about the yoga class and the massage, folks coming in, which I love both of those. And I would like both of those, please. But I'm talking about, how do we think about curbing isolation? How do we think about folks finding meaning in their work? Anyway, I want to know, for you, what does workplace well-being mean for the individual and for the organization?
So I think workplace well-being is just a really well organized, really highly functional, high performing workplace is what that means to me. And so when I talk about high performance, I talk about not only the organization achieving their organizational objectives, but I talk about the person, the people, being able to perform themselves at their highest level. So what that means is, you are, to your point, you have a job that you are really engaged in, and you have great relationships at work, and you feel like you're growing, and you're able to fit your work and life together, because as you and I both know, two things are not separate. They're all part of a whole. Some people are integrators. They like to have it together. Some people are separators. And research has been done. That was originally Ellen Kossick's research. That has recently just been confirmed by Gallup. So it's a 50-50 split between people who are separators and integrators. So well-being, to me, is the organization achieving its business objectives, while the individual is able to perform both professionally and personally in a way that they define as being high performing. So there really isn't one definition of that. And that's one of the things that I think we miss, is we think there's performance or well-being is one definition, and we all have a different definition that is going to switch and morph as we go through different phases of our life. So that's what I think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I think when you're talking about Ellen Kossick's research on separators and integrators, I think there's so much. One thing that you said before, I think snowflake became the term that it means in the political space. You said sort of everybody has their own definition of what work-life integration, work-life fit looks like, right? And so we have folks in the workforce who are separators and are like, yep, when I'm done,
I'm out.
I'm out.
Yeah.
And in order to be well,
Yeah.
I need to be out.
Yeah.
Right. And I need you to leave me alone. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas there are folks who are like, yeah, but in order for me to maintain my excitement, my drive, my energy around work, I need to kind of keep it going.
Mhm.
Right. And so when we talk about skills and training for employees to really understand how to navigate flexibility, we're not just talking about how to help them shut off. You know, I helped design those trainings
Yeah.
in one institution, and there are so many skills. You know, I think one of the challenges is we were talking about how folks are not always trained to know how to do their best in a flexible work environment. And I think part of that is being able to set boundaries. Part of them is being able to operate virtually in a way that they didn't. And also how to sort of navigate these sort of interpersonal differences, these preferences that are different, that are
Yeah.
different and that really directly relate to how we produce and how we collaborate, right? And how do we kind of teach folks to be able to not necessarily seamlessly, but good enough, to
Yeah.
be able to hear what other people's preferences are and say, okay, but also this is how I'm going to do it.
This is where I think we have to start to separate. We're talking about flexibility on two different levels, right? We're talking about organizational, the model,
Yep.
and then you're talking about the individual.
Individual. Yep.
And those two things have to reinforce each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, why that's important is some of that boundary setting has to happen at the organizational level.
Yeah.
So, that's part of the parameter setting that the organization has to go through. So, what I mean by that is my experiences in organizations, we really haven't even gotten pretty clear with each other on the norms and just rules that we're going to put in place around how we use the technology that we're using. So just do that. I mean, just have people like, please use send later. If this is not, I mean, it sounds basic, but that's the kind of stuff we have not defined. And so just some of that stuff organizationally would go a long way to helping the individual then say, okay, so these are the parameters my organization has set. So we're all on the same page. Now, how do I flexibly work within those set of parameters?
Right.
And then they further have to navigate in the way that you just outlined. But that's one of the reasons I wrote my books. I mean, you know this, because I would be out there executing flexible work strategies and people would be sitting there like, awesome. And I'm like, and now you have to go out and grab it and use it to fit your work and life together in a way that works for you. And they're like, what? I don't know how to do. So my books were really about the skill set that the individual needs to then say, okay, what are my work priorities? What are my personal priorities? And then how do I plan and coordinate them in a flexible way that considers what everybody else is doing, but also what I need. And people aren't trained to do that. Well, I mean, they're not. So this is where we get this misalignment, and we keep talking about flexibility, right? From both perspectives as one, and they're really two separate things that have to reinforce each other.
100%. And that's something that I've definitely spent a lot of time on, but I do think there's a unique challenge. I remember a conversation with some leaders talking about what, essentially the send later idea, right? Like talking about I was asked, what are the most important issues related to future of work? And I said, equity and well-being. What do we mean by well-being? Well, could we not send emails after 7?
Yeah.
And there was almost like,
Here's my favorite story. This happened a few years ago, but it was still sticks in my mind today. So I went into a pharmaceutical company. I was with all these senior leaders. This leader comes in and he starts telling me the story. He's like, I take the bus from Eastern Long Island into work every day.
Okay.
I get on the bus at 6:00 in the morning. He thinks he's being like Mr. Flexible. Okay. He's like, and that is when I start doing my emails. I get all my emails done. Okay. All right. So he's given this whole thing. He leaves. his people are just like, it's a nightmare. Okay. We are setting our alarms for 6:00 because, and then he goes, before he leaves, he goes, and they get right back to me and we get all of our stuff done. Like, he's so excited. He thinks it's so great. He leaves, right? People,
Right.
right? So I'm thinking, okay, this is not going to work for this team. And they're like quitting. They're like, I'm going to quit. Like, and
Yeah, sure.
this is where the personal and the organizational are not aligned. So
Right.
after the session, I go in and he's like, so how did it go? Like, are they feeling good about everything? I'm like, actually, we have a problem. Okay. And the problem is that that's your way of working, but you have not set the team parameters around which you've agreed. And he's like, oh my God, I don't mean for them to get back to me right away. I just thought that's what they were doing, like me. I said, you have to make it clear.
Yeah.
And so this is where, again, the sort of organizational structure has got to be intentionally set. So then people know how they are expected to flexibly work within it. And that's the part that's not been intentional. And then over here in the individual, that isn't intentional really either, because they don't know how to do it and they're not being trained. So they're trying their best. It's just a mess.
Yeah. I'm glad. Let's call a spade a spade. It's just a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess. And I think, what I want to bring us to a wonderful stat that you highlighted in a LinkedIn post, but that came out of this study. The 34% of leaders who actually buy into this idea of flexibility are excited about building flexible organizations, high-performing flexible organizations. Tell us about those people and what are they doing.
Well, it's funny. I always get asked from leaders, hey, what are the characteristics of the leaders you work with before COVID? Like, that's fascinating to me. And I say there's 3 things. 1, they see the future. They know it's flexible. Like, they're not kidding themselves that we are working the way they've been working.
Right.
They also know, but there has to be some strategy and structure around that.
Sure.
And they're curious. They don't pretend to know what the answer is, but they're just really curious and trying to figure it out. And so to me, those are the characteristics of those leaders. They know the future's flexible. They know there needs to be strategy and intention around it, but they're curious. They don't pretend to think, oh, we've landed the plane. I've stated it's 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're done. Okay. They don't think that. They think, hey, we've got to figure out what works for the business, what works out for people.
Right.
Then we got to hold people accountable. We got to measure, and then we got to keep iterating.
Right. Interesting. So future is flexible. They acknowledge it. They acknowledge the need for intentionality. And I hear curiosity, but within that, there's so much, right? There's compassion. There's a connection to the workforce, right? There's an innovation piece, the kind of growth mindset, just what could work. Let's kind of try and fail. I heard someone at a conference recently who said, we keep waiting for the future of work to happen to us. And what we really need to be doing as HR leaders is, just start breaking things and seeing what works and what doesn't work.
This is one of the reasons I really have, I'm like a word.
I know.
I can say it. I'm a word nerd. I'm such a word nerd because I think words matter. And whenever I hear somebody talk about the future work, I'm like, so you understand that you're now presenting something that in people's minds is far, far away. And so they really actually don't need to do anything. It's like, let's just muse for a while on the future of work. And now I can go back to what I'm doing. I'm like, okay, it's now people. Okay.
It's now, we're still moving. I know. It is kind of hilarious. I do think, though, when we were talking earlier about leaders who can kind of set up 8 task forces about AI, is that there's something kind of exact science-y about it, even though it's not, right? There's just something where they feel like there's something under control, possibly. This is I'm not sure, but I think that when you hit that curiosity, that mindset that we're talking about that has the compassion, the innovation, the experimentation, there's a willingness, and this comes up in a lot of conversations about well-being to understand that we can't control the future,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
we cannot. Nobody put COVID together for this to work for anyone. I mean, it was a horrible, horrible tragedy. The world is consistently unfolding in these really unexpected and often very uncomfortable ways, sometimes less so, but we have to be open to that. And I think when you talk about the kind of leaders who are thinking in the right way, thinking about flexibility in a way that's realistic, that's visionary, that's creative, I think it's people who are willing to, let go of that control.
And be in their own discomfort.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories is a leader. She was amazing. She's like a friend now. This is how much I love her. I remember we were doing a transformation in her department, and she would say out loud in front of her leadership team, "I'm very uncomfortable with this. I'm going to say right now, I'm very uncomfortable with this," because she'd walk around and nobody would be there on a Friday, right? And she would email me and she'd say, "Okay, what's going on?" I said, "Okay, step back. Are people working? Can you get to people? Do you know they're?" And she's like, "Oh, they are actually." I was like, "Okay, then let it go. Let it go." But her being able to say, "I'm uncomfortable," but still support the change, let her leadership team know their discomfort was totally normal, but it's still okay to go forward. And she said, "We're learning. We're all learning right now." And now she's like, it's funny, you look at her bio, it's like the second line is like flexible work transformation leader or something. And I'm like, she's so into it now. I'm like, okay. So,
Amazing.
but she was able to sit in her discomfort. And that's part of the curiosity too.
I love that. I could literally just talk to you all day about these things. It is so much fun, but I'm going to close our conversation. You've just given us like 20 different sound bites, different pieces of advice for leaders. Anything to close that you think you want to make clear to everyone?
So what I encourage leaders to do, and even individuals, you don't have to wait for your leader to do this, is we all just have to ask and answer a new question. And the question is very simply this: what do we need to do? And then how, when, and where do we do it best? And if you just keep asking and answering that question with each individually, even yourself, and then optimally with the people you work with, you will begin to define the parameters of that flexible work model that leads to that well-being as I just defined it. So
Love it.
just keep it simple, man. Just start with the what, then the how, when, and where. And then if you're an individual, start with the we, and then the I. That's all you have to remember.
I love it. I love it. Let's sit with the discomfort and ask and answer some simple questions. Thank you, Cali. Thank you so much for being here with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rachael.
Thank you for joining us on The Breadwinners. For more on how to navigate these changes and stay ahead and well in the evolving world of work, make sure to subscribe to our podcast. For leaders curious about adapting to the realities of today's workplace, visit reworkingleadership.com and take the shift assessment, which can offer you some customized recommendations that you can apply for your team. You can find us at thebreadwinnerspodcast.com and everywhere that podcasts live. If you like what we're up to this season, please leave us a review or email us at thebreadwinnerspodcast@gmail.com. We want to know if this resonates. Join us next time as we continue to explore the shift model, specifically the category of ties, the importance of connecting to each other for our well-being and performance at work. We have another amazing expert, Maura Ahrens-Mile, host of the Anxious Achiever podcast. Until next time, keep talking and supporting each other as we move through these changing times.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.